He stood in a hospital corridor holding his dying daughter for the first time. She weighed less than a bag of sugar. 3 months premature. 30% chance of survival. The doctors said her mother's stress during pregnancy had triggered the early labor. That same man had caused that stress. He'd looked the mother in the eye 2 months earlier and told her their unborn child was, in his exact words, an inconvenient complication to my business empire. Now, as machines beeped their warnings and nurses rushed past with urgent efficiency, he had a choice: save his billion-dollar empire or save his soul. You're about to discover which one he chose, and why that choice would become the most talked-about scandal in Lagos history. It was 6 p.m. on a Friday evening. The city transforms into a river of brake lights and honking horns, millions of people fighting their way home through traffic that defies logic and tests patience. But high above the chaos, in the glass towers of Victoria Island and the exclusive enclaves of Banana Island, a different Lagos exists. A Lagos of private elevators and rooftop helipads, where traffic is something other people endure. This is the world of Nigeria's super elite. Not just wealthy, stratospheric. The kind of wealth that rewrites reality, that turns laws into suggestions and people into chess pieces. The kind of wealth that most Nigerians will never see, never touch, never comprehend. And nobody embodied that rarefied air better than Tunde Adeleke. At 37 years old, Tunde wasn't just rich. He was a phenomenon. Adeleke Global Enterprises had started as his father's small import-export business and had metastasized under Tunde's leadership into something unprecedented. Telecommunications networks across 15 African countries. Real estate developments in Lagos, Abuja, Accra, and Nairobi. Oil distribution contracts that generated revenue in the billions. Technology investments in startups across 3 continents. Forbes estimated his net worth at $4.6 billion, though the number fluctuated daily based on currency exchanges and market movements. He employed 43,000 people directly, with another 100,000 depending on his companies indirectly. When Tunde Adeleke sneezed, Lagos caught pneumonia. The media loved him. The Prince of Lagos, they called him. Nigeria's golden son. The future of African enterprise. Magazine covers featured his sharp suits and sharper business acumen. Business schools taught case studies about his acquisitions and mergers. Young entrepreneurs studied his moves the way theology students studied scripture, looking for secrets to replicate his success. His compound in Banana Island was obscene even by billionaire standards. 28,000 square feet of architectural excess. The main house alone had 37 rooms, though Tunde could go weeks without entering some of them. Indoor pool. Outdoor infinity pool. Gym equipped better than most professional training facilities. A garage that was really a showroom for 19 vehicles. 2 Bugattis, a Rolls-Royce Phantom customized to his specifications, 3 Range Rovers, 5 Mercedes, and an assortment of sports cars whose combined value exceeded what most Nigerians would earn across multiple lifetimes. The art collection was museum quality. Picasso. Basquiat. Ben Nwanwa's tutu hung in his study, worth more than the annual GDP of some small nations. Wine cellar stocked with bottles older than Nigerian independence. A home theater that seated 24, though Tunde typically watched movies alone. Staff quarters for 32 employees who moved through the grounds like well-trained ghosts, anticipating needs before they were voiced, maintaining the illusion of effortless luxury that actually required constant, invisible labor. But walk through those marble halls at night, and you'd notice something profound: emptiness. Not physical emptiness. Every surface was perfectly appointed, every corner Instagram-ready. Emotional emptiness. The kind that echoes through 37 rooms and reminds you that square footage is a poor substitute for human connection. Tunde felt it most acutely at night. After the staff had retired to their quarters, after the security team had done their final sweep, after the business calls had ended and the emails had been answered. He'd stand in his master bedroom, bigger than most people's apartments, and feel the weight of all that space pressing down on him. Success was supposed to feel different than this. Lonelier, maybe, but not hollow. Not empty in a way that made him question the entire architecture of his life. The charity gala was held at the Eco Hotel's presidential ballroom. Standard Lagos elite affair, women in designer gowns worth more than annual salaries, men in bespoke suits discussing deals between champagne flutes, everyone performing wealth for everyone else. Tund attended out of obligation. His company had donated 15 million naira to the cause, maternal health clinics in northern Nigeria, and his presence was expected. He was working the room with practiced efficiency, shaking hands, making small talk, projecting engaged interest while his mind ran through tomorrow's board meeting agenda. Then he saw her. She wasn't dressed for attention. Simple traditional outfit, Ankara wrapper and blouse in muted tones, no designer labels, no statement jewelry. She sat at a corner table with a laptop, completely absorbed, occasionally speaking into her phone with urgent intensity. While everyone else performed for the room, she was actually working. Tund found himself drawn over, curiosity overriding his usual calculation. "You seem focused," he said, approaching her table. She looked up, startled, then recognition flickered across her features. Not impressed recognition, just awareness that she was speaking to someone important. "I'm trying to coordinate volunteer deployments. We have 11 new clinics launching next month, and we're short-staffed by 47 people. These events raise money, which is crucial, but the real work happens in the field." "You're with the Maternal Health Organization?" "I'm the Director of Operations. Dr. Zainab Ibrahim." She offered her hand, firm handshake, no ceremony. "You're Tund Adelik. Your company donated generously." "Thank you. It's a worthy cause." "Is it?" Her eyes were sharp, challenging. "Or is it just good PR? Tax-deductible charity that lets corporations feel virtuous without actually addressing systemic problems?" Most people didn't challenge Tund. Most people agreed with everything he said, laughed at his jokes whether they were funny or not, treated every word as profound wisdom. Zainab Ibrahim was looking at him like a student challenging a professor's lazy thesis. He was captivated. "That's a fair question," he said, pulling out a chair without asking permission. "What would actually addressing systemic problems look like?" What followed was a 4-hour conversation that derailed both their evenings. Zainab explained the failures of Nigeria's healthcare infrastructure with the precision of a surgeon and the passion of an activist. She'd done her medical degree at the University of Ibadan, specialized in public health, turned down lucrative private practice positions to work with underserved communities. She'd spent 3 years in rural Kaduna, setting up clinics in villages that had never seen a doctor. She'd delivered babies in conditions that would horrify Western medical establishments. She'd watched women die from preventable complications because basic resources weren't available. And she blamed people like Tund for it. "Your company made 8 billion naira in profit last year," she said, not accusatory but factual. "If you'd invested just 5% of that in healthcare infrastructure, not charity, actual investment in building sustainable systems, you could have saved thousands of lives. But that doesn't generate returns, so it doesn't happen." "That's not entirely fair," Tund countered. "Companies have obligations to shareholders, to employees. We can't just, can't, or won't." She leaned forward, intensity radiating from her. "Tund, you're one of the most powerful men in Nigeria. You have resources most people can't imagine. You could reshape entire sectors if you wanted to. The question isn't capability. It's priority. And your priorities are profit margins, market share, wealth accumulation. Which is fine, I'm not judging. But don't pretend 15 million naira in charity absolves you of responsibility for the systems you benefit from." Anyone else speaking to him like this would have been dismissed as naive, impractical, not understanding how business actually worked. But Zainab wasn't naive. She was brilliant, practical, and absolutely right. She understood systems and incentives better than most of his executives. She'd just chosen to deploy that understanding in service of something beyond personal gain. "How old are you?" he asked, suddenly curious about this woman who challenged him with such precision. 26. "Why?" "Because you're making me reconsider assumptions I've held for 15 years, and I'm trying to figure out how someone who's been alive for 26 years is wiser than I am at 37. She smiled then, transforming her face from serious to radiant. "Maybe because I've spent those 26 years in actual reality instead of billionaire bubbles." "When's the last time you went to a public hospital, Tund? Rode a Danfo? Waited in line at a government office?" "My guess is never. You live in a curated reality where everything works because you have enough money to make it work. The rest of us live in the actual Nigeria." The conversation continued long after the gala ended, moved to the hotel's rooftop terrace, stretched past midnight. They talked about healthcare and infrastructure, about the responsibilities of wealth, about whether systemic change was possible or if corruption was too deeply embedded in Nigeria's DNA. They argued and agreed, challenged and conceded, found themselves laughing at shared frustrations with their country's absurdities. By the time Tund's driver dropped Zainab at her apartment in Surulere at 2 a.m., he knew three things with absolute certainty. First, Zainab Ibrahim was the most interesting person he'd met in years. Second, she represented everything his world usually excluded: authenticity, purpose beyond profit, connection to actual human struggles. Third, he was going to see her again. "Can I take you to dinner?" he asked as she gathered her things. "I don't date billionaires," she said, but she was smiling. "Good thing I'm asking you to dinner, not marriage." She paused at the car door. "I work 12-hour days at a clinic in Kaduna. I'm only in Lagos for this fundraiser." "Then I'll come to Kaduna." "You'd fly to Kaduna for dinner?" "I'd fly to Kaduna to continue this conversation. The dinner is just an excuse." She stared at him for a long moment, and Tund felt evaluated in a way that had nothing to do with his net worth or social status. Finally, "Okay. But somewhere local. No fancy restaurants trying to impress me. And you pay for your own meal. I don't want your money." "Deal." Their first official date was at a local bukka in Kaduna, plastic chairs and metal plates, food so good Tund couldn't remember the last time he'd enjoyed a meal more. The second date was a tour of the clinic where Zainab worked, eye-opening in its austerity and inspiring in its impact. The third date was a conversation that lasted 9 hours, covering everything from childhood dreams to adult disappointments, from family expectations to personal rebellions. By the fourth date, Tund knew he was falling for her. By the sixth, he was certain. By the 10th, he was planning how to build a life that included this extraordinary woman who made him want to be better than he'd ever imagined being. The courtship was intense and compressed. 4 months of weekends stolen between his business obligations and her clinic work. 4 months of video calls that stretched past midnight, of text conversations that made him laugh during board meetings, of slowly realizing that everything he'd thought mattered actually didn't matter at all compared to this. Zainab was real in a way nothing else in his life was. She challenged him, pushed back when he was wrong, called out his privilege without apology, made him think about things beyond quarterly reports and stock prices. She represented a different kind of success, measured in lives improved rather than profits generated, in impact rather than income. And she didn't want his money. Refused it, actually. Insisted on paying her own way, driving her 7-year-old Honda, living in her modest 2-bedroom apartment. She wasn't performing independence. She genuinely didn't need his wealth. That alone made her different from every other woman who'd orbited his life, attracted to the fortune rather than the person. For months after they met, Tund flew to Kaduna on a Thursday afternoon, picked Zainab up from her clinic, and drove to a spot overlooking the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in oranges and purples, turning everything golden. I need to tell you something, he said. That sounds ominous. It's not. Or maybe it is, depending on how you respond. He took her hand. I've spent 15 years building an empire. I've accumulated wealth most people can't comprehend. I've achieved everything my father wanted and more. And none of it, has made me as happy as the last 4 months with you. Tund. Wait. Let me finish. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a ring box. I know this is fast. I know we've only known each other 4 months. I know you have every reason to say no. But I also know that I've never met anyone like you. That you make me want to be the man you see when you look at me instead of the man Forbes writes about. That I want to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you. He opened the box. The ring inside was stunning, a flawless diamond that caught the sunset and scattered it into rainbow fragments. It cost more than Zainab's annual salary, more than her car, more than most of the medical equipment at her clinic. Marry me, Tund said. Not because of what I have, but despite it. Marry me and let me prove that I can be the partner you deserve. That wealth doesn't have to corrupt. That we can build something real together. Zainab stared at the ring, tears streaming down her face. When she looked up, her expression was a mixture of joy and fear, hope and hesitation. I need you to promise me something first, she said. Anything. Promise you'll never ask me to choose between loving you and being myself. Promise you'll never make me small to fit into your world. Promise that the woman you're proposing to, the one who challenges you and works in clinics and drives a beat-up Honda, is the woman you actually want, not some refined version you're hoping I'll become. I promise, Tund said, and in that moment, he meant it with every fiber of his being. You're perfect exactly as you are. I don't want you to change. I want to change to be worthy of you. Then yes. She was laughing and crying simultaneously. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it. He slipped the ring onto her finger. Too large, would need to be resized, but she didn't care. They sat on that overlook until the sun disappeared completely and the city lights emerged like stars below them, planning a future that seemed luminous with possibility. Tund Adelik, the Prince of Lagos, the billionaire who had everything, had just gained the one thing money couldn't buy. Someone who saw past his wealth to the person underneath. Someone who made him believe he could be better than his worst impulses. Someone who represented hope that his life could mean something beyond profit margins. If he'd known what was coming, the choices he'd have to make, the betrayals he'd commit, the price they'd both pay for his moment of weakness, would he have still proposed? He wanted to believe he would have. But the truth, when it came, would be far more complicated than that. The engagement announcement dominated Nigerian social media for a week. Hashtag Tund and Zainab trended for 5 days straight. The society pages exploded with commentary, some celebrating the romance, others speculating about gold digging, many fascinated by the gulf between their backgrounds. Zainab's phone didn't stop ringing. Magazine interview requests. Television appearances. Brands wanting to sponsor her, to associate their products with this fairy tale of the billionaire and the humanitarian. She declined everything, overwhelmed by attention she'd never sought. This is your world, not mine, she told Tund one evening, scrolling through the 50th interview request of the day. I'm not comfortable being a celebrity. You don't have to be. We'll keep the wedding small, intimate. Just the people who matter. She laughed bitterly. Small and intimate? Tund, you're one of the most famous men in Nigeria. Our wedding will be news whether we want it to be or not. She was right, of course. The wedding planning quickly spiraled beyond their control. Event planners submitted proposals for ceremonies that would cost more than some nations' GDP. Guest lists ballooned to over 1,000 people, business associates, political connections, family obligations. What was supposed to be intimate became a production. But through it all, they had each other. Morning calls before Zainab started her clinic day. Evening video chats where Tund pretended to understand medical terminology as she vented about bureaucratic frustrations. Weekend visits when their schedules aligned, stolen moments of normalcy amid the chaos. The wedding was scheduled for 4 months away. Everything seemed to be falling into place. Then came the pregnancy test. It was a Tuesday morning. Zainab had been feeling off for a week. Nausea she attributed to stress, fatigue that seemed more profound than usual, heightened sensitivity to smells. Her medical training provided the checklist: fatigue, nausea, breast tenderness, missed period. The test confirmed what she'd already suspected. 2 lines. Unmistakable. Definitive. She sat on the bathroom floor of her apartment, staring at the plastic stick, processing the information with clinical detachment that gradually gave way to emotion. Pregnant. She was pregnant. They hadn't planned this. The wedding was still months away. They'd been careful but not perfectly careful, and apparently that had been enough. As the initial shock faded, something else bloomed: joy. Tentative at first, then expanding into something that filled her chest and made her laugh out loud in her empty bathroom. A baby. Their baby. The physical manifestation of what they were building together. She imagined telling Tund. Imagined his face lighting up with that rare, genuine smile that transformed his usually controlled features. Imagined planning for this new life, this tiny person who would be part both of them, her compassion and his determination, her principles and his resources. Maybe the timing was actually perfect. Maybe this was exactly what they needed, a reason to simplify the wedding, to focus on what mattered, to start their family without all the performance and spectacle. She called him. "Can you come to Kaduna? I have something important to tell you. I'm in the middle of merger negotiations with the Chinese delegation. Can it wait until this weekend?" Something in her voice must have conveyed urgency. "No. It really can't." Pause. She could hear him thinking, calculating, reprioritizing. "I'll be there tonight. 8 o'clock. He arrived at 7:30, his driver navigating the roads from the private airstrip with aggressive efficiency. Tund entered her apartment still wearing his business suit, his phone buzzing with ignored messages from executives who didn't understand why their CEO had suddenly departed critical negotiations. "What's wrong? Are you okay? Is it your family?" "I'm fine. Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually." She took his hand, led him to the couch. "Tund, I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. Zainab watched his face, waiting for the transformation she'd imagined, surprise giving way to joy, concern shifting to excitement, the walls he kept up during business dissolving into genuine emotion. None of it came. Instead, Tund's expression went carefully blank. Not shocked, controlled. Like a mask descending, hiding whatever was happening behind his eyes. He sat completely still for 5 seconds that stretched into eternity. "How far along?" His voice was flat, businesslike. The tone he used in board meetings when receiving bad quarterly reports. The question sent ice through Zainab's veins. Not, "That's wonderful," or "We're having a baby," or any variation of happiness. Just clinical inquiry. "How far along?" "About 6 weeks, I think. I'll schedule a proper appointment to confirm, but based on." "We need to talk." Tund stood abruptly, began pacing her small living room. "There's something I should have told you before. Something I kept thinking I'd find a way to resolve, but—" "Tund, you're scaring me. What's wrong?" He stopped at her window, looking out at Kaduna's evening streets, his back to her. When he spoke, his voice was distant, like he was reading from a script. "My father died 8 years ago. His will established a trust that controls the majority shares of Adel-Eek Global. The trust has very specific provisions about inheritance and succession." "Okay." Zainab felt dread building in her stomach. "Before he died, my father arranged a marriage contract. with Senator Marcus Okonkwo's family. His daughter, Amaka. The agreement was negotiated when I was 28, before I'd built most of what Adelik Global has become. The terms state that I must marry Amaka Okonkwo before my 38th birthday. If I don't comply. He paused, his shoulders tense. If I don't comply, I forfeit controlling interest in the company. My shares get redistributed to the family council. I lose operational control of everything I've built. The room tilted. Zainab gripped the arm of the couch to steady herself. You're engaged to someone else? Not engaged. Contracted. It's different. How is it different? You're telling me you're legally obligated to marry another woman. I'm telling you there's a contract that says that, yes. But I've had lawyers working on it for months, looking for loopholes, ways to break the agreement without destroying the company. I thought I had time. I thought I could find a solution before. Before what? Before we got married. Before I got pregnant. Her voice was rising, hysteria creeping in at the edges. Tund, when is your birthday? Silence. Heavy, damning silence. When is your birthday? November 15th. 4 months from now. The timeline crashed into her with physical force. 4 months. The exact window when their wedding was supposed to happen. The timing wasn't coincidence, it was calculation. He'd proposed knowing he had this deadline, knowing he might have to choose, knowing she was possibly just a placeholder until he figured out how to escape his father's trap. So what was your plan? Zainab's voice shook with rage and heartbreak. Marry me, hope your lawyers found a loophole, and if they didn't, what? Apologize. Divorce me. Make me disappear. No. Zainab, it's not like that. I love you. Everything between us is real. I genuinely believed, I still believe, there's a way out of this contract. My legal team has been. Your legal team? She was standing now, fury overwhelming her initial shock. Your legal team has been working on this for months and you never thought to mention it? Never thought I deserved to know that the man proposing to me was contractually obligated to marry someone else. I didn't want to worry you about something that might not even matter. If the lawyers found a way to break the contract. But they haven't, have they? They haven't found a way. That's why you look like someone just handed you a death sentence instead of news that we're having a baby together. Tund turned to face her finally, and his expression was anguished. But Zainab found she didn't care about his pain. Not when her entire life was crumbling around her. I'm trying to figure this out, he said desperately. There has to be a solution that doesn't require me to choose between. Between what? Between your empire and your family? Between money and the woman carrying your child? She laughed, hollow and broken. Don't you see, Tund? You've already chosen. If you hadn't, you would have told me about this contract from the beginning. You would have been honest instead of letting me plan a wedding that might never happen. You would have treated me like a partner instead of a complication you hoped would resolve itself. That's not fair. You don't understand the stakes here. Adelik Global employs 43,000 people. If I lose control, my cousin Kunal takes over, and he'll destroy in 6 months what took 3 generations to build. We're not just talking about my personal wealth, we're talking about thousands of families who depend on those jobs. And what about our family? What about the baby I'm carrying? Do we not depend on you? Do we not matter because we're not 43,000 strong? Of course you matter. You matter more than... He stopped himself. More than what? More than the company. Then prove it. Choose us. Right now. Tell me you'll walk away from Adelik Global, marry me like you promised, and build a different life together. The pause before he answered told her everything. It's not that simple, he finally said. Yes, it is. It's exactly that simple. Either you choose us or you choose the empire. There is no middle ground here, Tund. No compromise position where you get to have everything. Make your choice. I need time to think, to explore all options. The lawyers said. The lawyers said what? That there might be some magical solution where you keep your billions and your family and your clean conscience. Life doesn't work like that. Sometimes you have to sacrifice. Sometimes you have to choose what matters most. And right now, watching you struggle with this decision like it's some complex business problem instead of the most basic human choice imaginable, I'm realizing something terrible. What? I don't know you at all. The man I fell in love with, the one who flew to Kaduna for dinner, who sat in my clinic and actually listened, who proposed on that overlook and promised never to make me choose between love and being myself, that man was a fantasy. A performance. The real Tund Adelik is standing in front of me right now, and he's a stranger. A stranger who values money more than people. Power more than principle. Empire more than his own child. Zainab, please. Get out. We need to talk about this. About arrangements for the baby, about arrangements. The word tasted like poison. You want to discuss arrangements? Like this is a business deal? Like our child is a contractual obligation to be managed? I'm trying to be practical. Whatever happens with the company, I'm not abandoning my child. I'll provide financial support, set up trusts, make sure you both have everything you need. I don't want your money. She was screaming now, all composure shattered. I don't want trust funds or financial arrangements or whatever sterile, distant parenting you think money can buy. I want a father for my child. A real father. Someone who's present, who chooses us, who doesn't treat us like line items in a corporate restructuring. I'm trying to figure out how to do both. No. You're trying to figure out how to do neither. How to keep your empire without actually sacrificing anything. How to maintain your wealth while pretending you're a good person. But you can't have it both ways, Tund. You have to choose. Empire or family. Money or love. The company or us. She walked to her door, opened it. I need you to leave. Before I say things I can't take back. Zainab, I love you. I love our child. I just need time to. Time to what? Calculate the cost-benefit analysis? To determine whether I'm worth losing billions over. Tears were streaming down her face now, but her voice was steel. Here's what I know. When someone tells you they love you, but they need time to figure out if you're worth sacrificing for, they've already answered the question. They just don't have the courage to admit it. That's not what I'm saying. It's exactly what you're saying. Now get out. Go back to Lagos. Go back to your mansion and your board meetings and your 43,000 employees who matter more than your own flesh and blood. Just go. Tund stood frozen, clearly wanting to argue, to explain, to somehow make this better. But there was nothing to say. Nothing that would bridge the chasm that had just opened between them. He left. Walked out of Zainab's apartment, climbed into his waiting car, his phone already lighting up with messages about the Chinese deal he'd abandoned. As the driver pulled away, Tund looked back at the modest apartment building where the woman he loved stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the light, hand instinctively protective over her still flat stomach. He should have stopped the car. Should have run back. Should have told her that she was right, that nothing mattered more than her and their child, that he'd walk away from every naira if that's what it took. But he didn't. He let the car carry him back to the airport, back to Lagos, back to his empire. Telling himself he needed time to think. Time to find a solution. Time to figure out how to have everything without losing anything. What he didn't realize, what his privilege and arrogance prevented him from seeing, was that he'd already lost everything that mattered. And the price he'd pay for that loss would be far higher than he could possibly imagine. 3 days after walking out of Zainab's apartment, Tun sat in the family compound in Ijibuode, the ancestral home of the Adel-Eek family. The building was old money personified, sprawling grounds maintained by a small army of gardeners, traditional Yoruba architecture updated with modern amenities, walls covered with portraits of ancestors whose expressions seemed to judge every generation that followed. The compound felt like a museum dedicated to wealth and power. Every room told stories of accumulation: how grandfather Adel-Eek had made his first fortune in textiles, how Tun's father had expanded into telecommunications, how 3 generations had built something that now employed tens of thousands and generated billions in annual revenue. But today, the compound felt more like a courthouse. Tun had been summoned by his uncle, Balagan Adel-Eek, who now served as head of the family council. The message had been clear: come immediately. We need to discuss your situation. Tun entered the main parlor to find 8 people waiting. Uncle Balagan, 71, sitting in what had been Tun's grandfather's chair like a king on a throne. Aunt Mareo, his father's sister, sharp-eyed and calculating. 3 cousins, Kunnel, Folake, and Segan, each barely hiding their hope that Tun would fail and the empire would be split among them. 2 family lawyers, gray-haired men who'd been managing a Adel-Eek business for decades. And Senator Marcus Okonkwo. The senator's presence transformed this from a family discussion into something else entirely. Marcus Okonkwo was 63, silver-haired, distinguished, and utterly ruthless. He'd been in the Senate for 22 years, accumulating power the way other people collected art. He controlled political appointments across 8 northern states. His business interests ranged from oil to agriculture to media companies. He was exactly the kind of man Tun's father had wanted to ally with: powerful, connected, dangerous to cross. Tun. Balagan's voice carried the authority of age and position. Sit down. We have much to discuss. Tun sat, feeling like a child called before the principal despite being worth billions and running a continental enterprise. I assume you know why you're here, Senator Okonkwo said, his tone pleasant, conversational, which somehow made it more threatening. I can guess. Good. Then let me be direct. Your father and I had an agreement. A contract that benefits both our families substantially. That contract stipulates that you will marry my daughter Amaka before your 38th birthday. We are now 4 months from that deadline, and I hear you've been distracted. I'm engaged to someone else. Yes. Dr. Zainab Ibrahim. Admirable woman, from what I understand. Quite accomplished in her field. But not part of our arrangement. The senator's smile didn't reach his eyes. And now I hear she's pregnant with your child. That does complicate things. How did you? Tund looked at his uncle. Please, nephew. Balagan's expression was disappointed. You think we don't monitor your activities? Your driver works for the family. We knew about the pregnancy within hours of Dr. Ibrahim taking that test. The surveillance felt invasive, controlling, but Tund forced himself to stay focused. What I do with my personal life is my business. Normally, yes, Senator Okonkwo agreed. But when your personal life threatens to breach a contract worth billions to both our families, it becomes our business. Let me outline what's at stake here, so we're all clear. He pulled a leather folder from his briefcase, slid it across the table. Tund opened it to find legal documents, financial projections, political org charts. Your marriage to my daughter Amaka doesn't just merge our families, it merges our empires. My political network across the north combined with your business infrastructure across West Africa creates unprecedented power. We're talking about control of approximately 43% of Nigeria's private sector wealth. Telecommunications, oil distribution, real estate, agriculture, media, all under one umbrella. The synergies alone would be worth tens of billions. He leaned forward. But more importantly, it creates political protection you desperately need. You have operations in 17 countries, Tund. Every one of those operations depends on government licenses, regulatory approvals, political goodwill. I can provide that protection. Or I can remove it. The threat was delivered calmly, almost casually. Are you threatening me, Senator? I'm explaining reality. Your telecommunications licenses in Nigeria alone. How many government approvals do those require? How many can be revoked with a phone call if, say, regulatory violations were discovered during an audit? The senator's smile was predatory. Your oil distribution contracts in the Delta. How secure are those, really, if local governors decided you were no longer the preferred vendor? Your real estate developments in Abuja. What happens if building permits get mysteriously delayed or revoked? That would be illegal. Welcome to Nigeria, son. Legality is flexible when you have the right connections. Senator Okonkwo sat back. Now, I'm not saying any of that will happen. I'm simply illustrating what your business looks like without political protection versus what it looks like with it. Your father understood this. That's why he arranged the marriage contract. He knew that in Nigeria, business and politics are inseparable. You can't sustain an enterprise at your scale without powerful political allies. Aunt Mareo spoke up. Tund, this isn't just about the Okonkwo alliance. It's about your father's will. The trust provisions are explicit. You must marry according to family council approval before your 38th birthday or forfeit controlling shares. That's not negotiable. It's written into ironclad legal documents that 18 different lawyers have reviewed. I've had my own lawyers reviewing those documents for months. Looking for loopholes? Balogun laughed. Your father was many things, but sloppy wasn't one of them. The will is airtight. You marry Amaka, you keep the company. You marry someone else or don't marry at all, you lose everything. It's that simple. And what about my child? Tund's voice was tight. What about Zainab? That's what we're here to discuss, one of the family lawyers interjected. He slid another document across the table. Your father's will also has provisions regarding children born outside approved marriages. Any such children are automatically excluded from inheritance claims. Furthermore, and this is critical, if you publicly acknowledge such a child within 10 years of an approved marriage, it triggers breach of contract penalties. Tund read the highlighted section, feeling sick. 300 million naira in damages to the Okonkwo family. Your father wanted to ensure clean succession, the lawyer explained. He'd seen too many wealthy families torn apart by disputed heirs, illegitimate children claiming portions of estates, half-siblings fighting over inheritance. These provisions exist to prevent that chaos. By forcing me to deny my own child's existence? By protecting the family legacy, Balogun corrected. Tund, be rational. Women have children outside of marriage all the time. Society understands these things happen. You can still provide for the child financially, anonymously, through trusts and intermediaries. Dr. Ibrahim never has to want for anything. The child can attend the best schools, have every advantage. You just can't acknowledge them publicly for 10 years. After that, once your marriage to Amaka is secure and you've produced legitimate heirs, you can have whatever relationship you want with the other child. Legitimate heirs? Tund felt rage building. You're talking about my child like they're illegitimate. Legally, they are. The lawyer's tone was clinical. Children born outside of marriage are illegitimate by definition. That's not judgment, just legal classification. Senator Okonkwo cleared his throat. Let me offer a different perspective. I've had my people look into Dr. Ibrahim. She's proud, principled. She's already refused your financial support, hasn't she? Tund didn't answer, but his expression confirmed it. She won't want to be your mistress. Won't want her child growing up in the shadows. which means she'll likely cut you off completely if you marry Amaka. She'll raise the child on her own, probably move away, maybe even leave Nigeria. From her perspective, that's the dignified choice, complete separation rather than shameful secrecy. That's not what I want. But it's what will happen if you're honest with her about the situation. So here's what I propose. We move forward with the marriage to Amaka as planned. You and Dr. Ibrahim have a clean break, painful now, but cleaner in the long run. And then, through anonymous channels, we ensure she and the child are taken care of. Scholarships for the child that don't trace back to you. Grants for her medical work. A comfortable life where she never has to know the money comes from you. Cousin Cunnel, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up with barely concealed glee. Or you could refuse. Choose the girl and the baby. Walk away from Adelique Global entirely. I'm sure you'd be very happy in your modest life, watching the empire our grandfather built get divided among the family while you play house with your doctor girlfriend. Cunnel, enough, Balogun snapped. Then, more gently to Tund, but he's not wrong about the consequences. If you refuse to marry Amaka, you don't just lose CEO position. You lose your shares. The company gets split among the family council. I'll be honest, Cunnel would likely become the new CEO. Cunnel gambles compulsively and makes terrible business decisions. I know. Which is why Adelique Global would likely collapse within 18 months. All those jobs you mentioned, the 43,000 families who depend on the company, they'd be devastated. Not to mention the ripple effects through the economy. Suppliers, contractors, service providers. You're talking about economic damage that would affect hundreds of thousands of people. The manipulation was expert, appealing to Tund's sense of responsibility while ignoring the moral bankruptcy of the entire situation. But it was working. Tund felt the weight of all those jobs, all those families, all that infrastructure that would crumble if he made the selfish choice. I need to think, he said finally. You have 72 hours, Senator Okonkwo stated, standing. After that, I begin making phone calls. Regulatory agencies, licensing boards, political allies. I'll give them all the same message. Tund Adelique is not reliable. Not a good investment. Not someone to trust with government contracts. Your business will start bleeding before you even realize you've been cut. After they all left, Tund sat alone in the parlor where his father had once held court. The portraits of his ancestors stared down, grandfather Adelique, stern and uncompromising, his father, calculating and cold, great-grandfather Adelique, who'd started with nothing and built the foundation of their fortune. Had they faced choices like this? Had they sacrificed people they loved for empire? Were these the same moral compromises every generation of Adeliques had made, justifying cruelty as duty, calling heartlessness strategy? Tund thought of Zainab, alone in Kaduna, carrying his child. He thought of that child, his daughter or son, growing up without a father because Tund had chosen billions over presents. He thought of waking up next to Amaka Okonkwo for the next 40 years, living a lie, pretending contentment while his actual family existed somewhere else, hidden, denied. And he thought of 43,000 employees. Families depending on their Adelique Global paychecks. Children going to school because their parents had jobs. Communities sustained by the infrastructure his company provided. How did you weigh one life against 43,000? One child against an empire? Personal happiness against collective welfare? The questions had no good answers. Just choices, each terrible in different ways. Tund spent those 72 hours in agony. He consulted with 18 different lawyers. Every single one confirmed the will was airtight. He met with financial advisors who showed him projections of what his wealth would look like if he lost the company. Comfortable by normal standards, poverty by his current ones. He talked to business partners who made clear they were invested in Adelique Global, not Tund Adelique personally. If he lost control, they'd adapt. He didn't call Zainab. couldn't bear to hear her voice, to face what he was about to do. On the 72nd hour, Tund made his decision. He called Senator Okonkwo. "I'll marry Amaka. As contracted." Wise choice. "The wedding will take place in 8 weeks. My people will coordinate with your people on details. And Zainab, leave her to me. I'll ensure she's taken care of quietly, without any connection to you. Better for everyone that way." Tund hung up and sat in his mansion, 37 rooms of emptiness, and wondered if he'd just saved 43,000 jobs or destroyed his own soul. He suspected it was both. The wedding of Tund Adelik and Amaka Okonkwo was everything a Nigerian elite wedding should be. The ceremony took place at Cathedral Church of Christ in Lagos. The massive church filled to capacity with 1,200 guests. Outside, security rivaled presidential inaugurations. Metal detectors, background checks, security personnel stationed every 20 feet. The guest list read like a who's who of Nigerian power: 3 governors, 15 senators, the vice president himself, CEOs of major corporations, international business leaders who'd flown in from London, New York, Dubai, media personalities, Nollywood stars. Anyone who mattered in Nigerian society was there, dressed in their finest, performing wealth and status for each other. Amaka looked stunning in her custom wedding dress, Italian silk, imported lace, a design that had taken 6 months to create and cost more than most Lagos apartments. Her jewelry was family heirlooms, gold and diamonds that had been in the Okonkwo family for generations. She walked down the aisle with perfect poise, the kind that comes from years of training in how to be the wife of a powerful man. Tund stood at the altar in a suit that cost $30,000, custom-made in Milan, and felt absolutely nothing. Watched Amaka approach and tried to summon something: appreciation for her beauty, gratitude that she was making this performance easy, anything. But there was just emptiness. The vows were traditional. Tund said, "I do," at the appropriate moment, his voice steady, giving no indication of the screaming happening inside his head. Amaka said, "I do," with a small smile, satisfied, having achieved what she'd been preparing for since she was 16. They kissed. The crowd applauded. Cameras flashed. Social media exploded with #TundAmaka trending instantly, photos of the beautiful couple spreading across Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. The reception was at Eco Hotel, transformed into something from a fantasy. Ice sculptures. Flower arrangements that cost more than cars. A 7-tier wedding cake. Live performances by 3 of Nigeria's biggest musicians. Champagne flowing like water, each bottle worth more than the average Nigerian earned in a month. Tund moved through it all on autopilot. Shook hands. Accepted congratulations. Danced with his new wife for the cameras. Smiled until his face hurt. Performed the role of happy groom with the expertise of someone who'd been performing his entire life. But in quiet moments, brief seconds between photos and speeches, his mind drifted to Kaduna. To a modest apartment where a woman who'd once loved him was now 3 months pregnant. To the child growing inside her, his child, who would never know their father had chosen empire over them. Zainab had watched clips of the wedding online. She couldn't help herself. Saw Tund looking handsome and hollow, Amaka looking triumphant. Saw their kiss, their first dance, their performance of happiness. Each image was a knife, twisting deeper. She was showing now, her stomach starting to round with the baby. At night, alone in her apartment, she'd feel the flutter of movement, their child, alive and growing, unaware of the betrayal that had defined their existence before they were even born. Zainab had cried herself empty in the weeks after Tund left. Now there was just determination. She'd raise this child alone. She'd give them everything she had: love, attention, values, purpose. What she couldn't give them was a father. Tund had made that choice when he'd chosen his empire. She'd blocked his number, returned his letters unopened, sent back the trust documents his lawyers had drafted with a note: I don't want your money or your guilt. My child and I will be fine without you. Pride. Beautiful, stubborn pride that was going to make her life infinitely harder, but at least allowed her to look herself in the mirror. The wedding night was surreal. Tund and Amaka went to the presidential suite at Eco Hotel, this massive space with panoramic views of Lagos, champagne chilling, rose petals scattered across surfaces in the kind of romantic gesture that felt mechanical when you didn't love the person you were with. Amaka began unpinning her elaborate hairstyle, removing jewelry worth more than most people's annual income. She caught Tund watching her in the mirror and smiled. We should discuss expectations. Expectations. I know about Dr. Ibrahim. About the pregnancy. My father had you investigated thoroughly before agreeing to this arrangement. Her voice was matter-of-fact, discussing adultery and abandonment like weather patterns. I want to be clear about what I expect from this marriage. Tund stared at this woman he barely knew, who would now legally be his wife until one of them died. What do you expect? First, complete discretion about her and the child. No public acknowledgement, no social media, no accidentally running into them at events. Whatever you feel for her stays private. Second, we will have children together within 2 years. I want 3, preferably at least 1 son. Those children will be your legal heirs, your public family. Whatever arrangement you have with the doctor's child is your business, but it doesn't interfere with our children's inheritance. You're very pragmatic about all this. I'm realistic. My parents' marriage was arranged. My father has maintained relationships with 3 other women throughout. My mother has her own arrangements. It's how power works in our world, Tund. Marriage isn't about love, it's about alliance, stability, producing heirs. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be. And if I can't accept it? Amaka looked at him with something almost like pity. Then you shouldn't have married me. But you did. So now you play the role. You show up for public events. You treat me with respect in front of others. You fulfill your marital obligations. I want those children soon. And in exchange, I won't make demands about your feelings or where your heart is. I just need your presence and your cooperation in building the public family we're meant to have. The casual cruelty of it was staggering. This was what his life had become, a performance of marriage with a woman who saw him as a business partner rather than a husband, who was already planning how to manage his abandoned child like a corporate liability. What if I can't do this? Tund asked quietly. What if I can't live this lie? Then you should have chosen differently 72 hours ago. But you didn't. You chose this. So now you live with it. Amaka finished removing her jewelry, began the process of getting out of the elaborate wedding dress. We can make this work, Tund. We can even be friends, of a sort. But you need to accept what this is, a strategic partnership. Not a romance. The sooner you stop mourning what you gave up and start appreciating what you have, the happier you'll be. But Tund couldn't appreciate what he had. Over the next 3 months, as he and Amaka settled into their role as Lagos's golden couple, he felt himself hollowing out. They attended society events together, smiled for cameras, played their parts perfectly. Amaka was an excellent actor, attentive without being clingy, supportive in public, completely independent in private. At night, in the mansion they now shared, they lived like polite strangers. Separate bedrooms. Separate lives that occasionally intersected for appearances. Amaka pursued her own interests, charity boards, social clubs, maintaining the Okonkwo family's political connections. Tund buried himself in work, expanding Adeli Global aggressively, as if profit margins could fill the void where his heart used to be. He thought about Zainab constantly. Wondered how the pregnancy was progressing. Whether she was still working at the clinic or had taken leave. Whether she thought about him. Hated him. Both. He'd tried calling twice. Blocked. Sent letters through intermediaries, returned unopened. Had his lawyers draft comprehensive trust documents for the baby, sent back with a note that broke his heart, "My child, and I don't need anything from you." The rejection hurt worse than he'd expected. He'd convinced himself that providing financially was a form of responsibility, that even if he couldn't be present, he could at least ensure they never wanted for anything. But Zainab wouldn't even give him that. She'd rather struggle than accept his money. It was pride. Beautiful, infuriating pride. And it made him love her more, which made everything worse. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a Wednesday evening, 5 months after his wedding to Amaka. Tund was in his study reviewing quarterly reports when his phone rang. Unknown number, Lagos area code. He almost didn't answer. "Mr. Adel-ik?" A woman's voice, professional, stressed. "Yes. This is Dr. Adeyemi at Lagos University Teaching Hospital. I'm calling about Dr. Zainab Ibrahim. You're listed as an emergency contact in her medical file from her first prenatal appointment." Tund's blood turned to ice. "What happened? Is she okay?" "She was brought in 3 hours ago by ambulance. Severe abdominal pain, heavy bleeding. We've diagnosed placental abruption. The placenta has separated from the uterine wall. It's a life-threatening emergency for both mother and baby. We had to perform an immediate cesarean section." Are they? He couldn't form the question. "Dr. Ibrahim is stable. She's in recovery. But Mr. Adel-ik, the baby was born at 26 weeks gestation. She's extremely premature. Current weight is 1 pound, 8 ounces. She's in our neonatal intensive care unit, and her condition is critical." 1 pound, 8 ounces. The weight of a small textbook. Impossibly tiny. What's her prognosis? The doctor hesitated. Survival rate for babies born at 26 weeks is approximately 50 to 70%, depending on various factors. But your daughter has additional complications, underdeveloped lungs, possible intraventricular hemorrhage, and she's small even for 26 weeks. The next 72 hours will be critical. I'm calling because Dr. Ibrahim was asking for you. She said you needed to know you have a daughter. A daughter. He had a daughter. Fighting for her life in an incubator because of stress. Stress he'd caused by abandoning her mother. I'm coming now. Tell Zainab I'm coming. Mr. Adel-ik, I should prepare you. The baby's condition is very serious. You should be ready for the possibility that... He hung up. Couldn't bear to hear survival statistics. Couldn't process the clinical evaluation of whether his daughter would live or die. Just needed to get to the hospital. Amaka found him in the garage, already in his car. Where are you going at this hour? The hospital. Zainab had the baby. It's bad. Something flickered across Amaka's face, not quite sympathy, but acknowledgement of human tragedy. Tund, think about what you're doing. If you go there, if you're seen at that hospital with her, people will ask questions. The media will connect dots. Our agreement was discretion. My daughter is dying. The words exploded from him, months of suppressed emotion erupting. My daughter was born 3 months early, weighs less than 2 pounds, and is fighting for her life in a NICU. And you want me to worry about discretion? About media? About our fucking agreement? I want you to think about consequences. The consequence of not going is that I never get to meet my daughter. That if she dies, I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I chose appearances over being there when she needed me most. I've already made too many wrong choices, Amaka. I'm not making another one. He started the engine. Amaka stepped back, recognizing something in his expression. Desperation, determination, the breaking point of a man who'd compromised himself into numbness and was finally, belatedly, choosing something real. If you go, she said quietly, our arrangement changes. This becomes public. My father will. Your father can do whatever he wants. I'm going to meet my daughter. He drove himself through Lagos traffic, breaking every law, his hands shaking on the wheel. A daughter. He had a daughter. Born too early, impossibly small, fighting impossible odds. And he'd caused it. His choices, his cowardice, his prioritization of empire over family, all of it had led to this moment. The NICU at Lagos University Teaching Hospital was a place of controlled urgency. Machines beeping constantly. Nurses moving with practiced efficiency between incubators. Tiny babies, some barely bigger than Tun's hand, hooked up to tubes and wires and monitors, fighting battles they were too small to fight. A nurse led him to Zainab's room first. She looked terrible, pale, weak, eyes hollow from pain medication and crying. There was an 4 in her arm, monitors tracking her vitals, the kind of clinical setup that made clear how close she'd come to dying. "You came," she whispered when she saw him. "Of course I came. Zainab, I'm so sorry. For all of it. For everything I put you through. Don't." She held up a hand, the movement weak. "I don't want apologies. I need you to meet your daughter. Then I need you to decide if she's worth fighting for." They wheeled her to the NICU in a wheelchair, an orderly pushing, Tund walking beside, both of them silent. What was there to say? All the words in the world couldn't undo the past 5 months. Couldn't change the choices that had led them here. The incubator was in the corner. Incubator 7, according to the label. Inside was the smallest human being Tund had ever seen. She was impossibly, heartbreakingly tiny. Translucent purple-red skin so thin he could see the blood vessels underneath. Eyes fused shut, wouldn't open for weeks yet. A breathing tube thicker than her nose. Wires everywhere, monitoring heart rate, blood oxygen, brain activity, temperature. Her entire body would fit easily in his 2 hands. But she was alive. Her miniature chest rising and falling with mechanical assistance. Her tiny fingers curled into fists smaller than Tun's thumb. Her heart beating, visible through translucent skin, fighting to keep this impossibly small person alive. "We named her Iamide," Zainab said from her wheelchair, voice breaking. "Joy has arrived. Because even like this, even fighting for every breath, she's the most joyful thing I've ever experienced. The most perfect thing I've ever seen." Tund couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. He pressed his hand against the incubator glass, as close as he could get to touching her without actually making contact. "Can I?" His voice cracked. "Can I hold her?" A nurse shook her head gently. "Not yet. She's too fragile. But you can touch her through the port. 1 finger only. Very gentle." Tund slid his hand through the opening in the incubator's side. Found Iamide's hand, smaller than his thumb, impossibly delicate. He touched 1 finger to her palm, afraid of breaking her, afraid his touch would somehow hurt. She gripped his finger. Whether by reflex or recognition, he didn't know. But he felt it, the connection, the reality of her. His daughter. His child. The person he'd chosen empire over, who now existed in physical form, fighting for life because he'd made the wrong choice. And in that moment, everything became crystal clear. The empire didn't matter. The billions didn't matter. The 43,000 employees, the political connections, the Okonkwo alliance, his father's will, the family legacy, none of it mattered. This tiny person, gripping his finger with strength that defied her size, mattered. Zainab, broken and brave in her wheelchair, mattered. Everything else was just noise. "I'm sorry," he said to Zainab, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so sorry. For all of it. For choosing wrong. For being a coward. For putting you through stress that caused this. For not being here from the beginning. For every single choice I made that prioritized anything over you and her. What are you sorry for specifically?" Zainab's voice was hard despite her weakness. Sorry you hurt me? Sorry you married someone else while I was pregnant? Sorry you made choices that landed our daughter in an incubator at 26 weeks, fighting for her life? I need specifics, Tund. What exactly are you sorry for? All of it. Every choice I made after you told me you were pregnant. Every moment I spent trying to find a compromise that didn't exist. Every second I wasted thinking I could have both the empire and you. He looked at Iamide, so small and vulnerable. I was wrong about everything. The company, the legacy, the responsibility to employees. I used all of it as justification for cowardice. For choosing what was easy over what was right. Pretty words. You said pretty words before too. Right before you married Amaka. I know. And I don't expect you to believe me. I don't expect forgiveness or trust or anything except the chance to prove I've changed. That I understand now what actually matters. For how long? Until the next board crisis? Until Amaka calls you home? Until Senator Okonkwo threatens your business interests? Amaka and I are getting divorced. Starting tomorrow. Tonight, if I can reach my lawyer. Zainab stared at him. You'd give up everything. The company, the inheritance, all of it. For a baby who might not survive the week. The brutal honesty of the question cut through all his rehearsed explanations. Yes. For her. For you. For the chance to be the man I should have been from the beginning. If that means losing billions, fine. If it means Senator Okonkwo destroys my business interests, fine. If it means my family disowns me and I lose everything I've spent 15 years building, fine. None of it matters if it costs me you. If it costs me her. You'll lose everything, Tund. Your family will strip you of the company. The senator will come after you with everything he has. You'll go from billionaire to what? To regular person? To someone who has to actually work for a living instead of just managing inherited wealth. He looked back at Iamide. I've had billions and it didn't make me happy. Didn't make me good. Just made me arrogant enough to think I could calculate my way out of basic human decency. Maybe losing it all is exactly what I need. Zainab was quiet for a long time, watching her daughter fight for life, processing Tund's words against the backdrop of 5 months of betrayal and abandonment. I don't forgive you, she said finally. I don't trust you. And I don't know if I ever will again. The hurt you caused, it's not something that disappears because you finally made the right choice. I know. But if you're serious, if you're really choosing us this time, not just saying it, then prove it. Be here tomorrow morning at 6 when the doctors make their rounds. Be here every morning after. Show me through actions, not words. And Tund. She met his eyes, her expression fierce despite her weakness. The first time you prioritize your empire over Iamide's care, we're done. No explanations. No second chances. Done. Are we clear? Crystal clear. Then welcome to the hardest fight of your life. Because keeping her alive? That's going to take everything you have. And it won't care about your billions or your business acumen or your strategic planning. It'll just demand that you show up every single day and be present for someone who can't give you anything in return except the chance to be her father. Tund looked at his daughter, 1 pound, 8 ounces of fighting spirit, completely unaware of the chaos she'd been born into. That's all I want. Just the chance to be her father. To be present. To choose right, finally, after choosing wrong for so long. Then prove it. Starting tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. I'll be here. And for the first time in 5 months, Tund meant what he said with every fiber of his being. Tund was at the hospital at 5:30 the next morning, 30 minutes before he'd promised, carrying coffee for the NICU nurses and breakfast he'd picked up from a 24-hour restaurant. He found Zainab already awake in her recovery room, looking exhausted but determined. "You're early," she said. "Couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about her." They went to the NICU together for morning rounds. The neonatologist, Dr. Okafor, was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and no-nonsense demeanor. She gathered them at Iamide's incubator and delivered the first of what would be many difficult briefings. "Iamide's first night was challenging," she began. "She had 3 apnea episodes. That's when she stops breathing. Each time, we had to intervene to restart respiration. Her blood oxygen levels are unstable. We've detected a grade 2 intraventricular hemorrhage, bleeding in the brain, which we're monitoring closely. Her lungs are severely underdeveloped, which we expected at 26 weeks. What's her prognosis?" Tund asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. "Honestly, it's too early to say. The next 72 hours are critical. If she survives that, we'll reassess. But you should understand, even if she survives the immediate crisis, she's facing months in the NICU. Months of potential complications, infection, more brain bleeding, lung damage, vision problems, feeding difficulties. And there's a significant chance of long-term disabilities. Cerebral palsy. Developmental delays. Hearing loss. I need you both to understand the reality of what you're facing." The clinical litany of potential disasters was overwhelming. But Tund focused on the one word that mattered: if she survives. "Not when. If. What does she need from us?" he asked. "Right now. Stability. Keep stress low. Stress affects breast milk production, and breast milk is crucial for her development. Be here consistently. Talk to her, even though she's sedated, babies can hear. And prepare yourselves emotionally for a very long, very difficult journey." That first day set the pattern for the next 78 days. Tund arrived every morning at 6, stayed through morning rounds, left only when visiting hours ended at 9 p.m. He learned the terrifying vocabulary of extreme prematurity, bradycardia, desaturations, necrotizing enterocolitis, retinopathy of prematurity. He watched Iamide have seizures, her tiny body convulsing while alarms screamed and nurses rushed in. He watched them insert new IVs when her veins collapsed, trying 4 or 5 times to thread a line into vessels smaller than thread. He watched her turn blue when she forgot to breathe, watched monitors flatline and restart, watched his daughter die and be brought back more times than he could count. And every single time, he showed up. Present. Committed. Refusing to leave even when Zainab told him to go rest, to take care of himself, that exhausting himself wouldn't help anyone. "I can't leave," he'd say. "What if something happens and I'm not here? What if she needs me and I'm gone like I've been gone her whole life?" The guilt ate at him constantly. Every complication felt like punishment for his choices. The placental abruption that had caused her premature birth, caused by stress. Stress from him abandoning Zainab. The underdeveloped lungs, the brain bleeding, the seizures, all consequences of being born too early. Born too early because he'd chosen empire over family. Meanwhile, his other life was imploding exactly as predicted. His lawyer filed divorce papers against Amaka 3 days after Iamide's birth. She fought it viciously, demanding a massive settlement, dragging it through the courts. Senator Okonkwo made good on every threat. Government contracts cancelled, regulatory agencies suddenly discovering violations that required licenses to be revoked, political allies turning hostile overnight. Tund's family council held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove him as CEO of Adelic Global. His cousin Kunal took over and immediately began making the terrible decisions everyone had predicted: risky investments, poor strategic choices, alienating key clients. The media had a field day. "Billionaire abandons empire for love child" was the kindest headline. Others were more vicious: Tund Adelik's fall from grace, the prince who threw it all away, Nigeria's most expensive mistake. Society pages that had once celebrated him now mocked him. Former friends stopped calling. Business partners made clear they were invested in Adelic Global, not Tund personally. His net worth began plummeting as stocks were redistributed, assets liquidated to pay legal settlements and penalties. Within 6 weeks, Tund lost 91% of his wealth. The mansion, the cars, the art collection, all sold to cover costs. He moved into a modest 3-bedroom apartment in Yaba, the kind of place he would have dismissed as beneath consideration 6 months earlier. But he didn't care. Because every morning at 6, he was at the NICU, watching his daughter fight for life. And that mattered more than all the billions he'd lost. Zainab watched his transformation with cautious hope mixed with lingering distrust. He was showing up, yes. Being present, making sacrifices, proving through action that he'd changed. But trust wasn't rebuilt in weeks. It required months, maybe years, of consistent behavior before she could believe it was permanent rather than temporary guilt. They fell into a routine. Tund would arrive first, bring coffee and breakfast. They'd attend morning rounds together, listening to updates on Iamide's condition. Then they'd spend the day in the NICU, taking turns sitting beside the incubator, talking to Iamide, providing kangaroo care when she was stable enough, holding her against their bare chests, skin-to-skin contact that helped regulate her temperature and heart rate. Those kangaroo care sessions were transcendent. Feeling Iamide's tiny body against his chest, her heart beating against his, the trust implicit in her complete vulnerability, it broke and remade Tund simultaneously. Here was something worth more than any empire. Someone who needed him not for his money or connections or strategic value, but simply for his presence. His fatherness. During those long days in the NICU, Tund and Zainab talked. Really talked, for the first time since the betrayal. About his choices, her hurt, whether forgiveness was possible, what co-parenting might look like if Iamide survived. "I don't think I can ever be with you romantically again," Zainab said one afternoon while Iamide slept against Tund's chest. "The trust is too broken. Every time I look at you, part of me remembers you walking away. Remembers you choosing your company over us. That doesn't just disappear. I understand. But I can see you're trying. I can see you've changed, or at least you're changing. And Iamide deserves a father who's present. So if you keep showing up, if you keep proving this is real, we can be partners. Co-parents. Maybe even friends eventually. That's more than I deserve." "Yes, it is. But I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for her." Zainab gestured at the incubator. "She deserves better than what either of us had. Better than an absent father or a bitter mother. So we figure out how to be adults about this. How to put her needs above our history." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was a path forward. And for Tund, that was more than he'd hoped for. The medical crises kept coming. At 4 weeks, Iamide developed an infection, sepsis that required aggressive antibiotics and nearly killed her. At 6 weeks, a feeding tube dislodged and she aspirated milk into her lungs, causing pneumonia. At 8 weeks, an eye exam revealed stage 2 retinopathy, blood vessel problems that could cause blindness if untreated. Each crisis felt like a test of Tund's commitment, of their collective ability to withstand trauma, of Iamide's sheer will to survive. And each time they made it through. Barely, sometimes, with setbacks that required additional interventions. But they survived. Slowly, impossibly, Iamide began to improve. Her weight crept up, 2 pounds, then 2.5, then 3. Her oxygen requirements decreased. The seizures became less frequent. The brain bleed stabilized and began to resolve. At 10 weeks, she opened her eyes for the first time, beautiful brown eyes that looked around the NICU with what seemed like curiosity. Tund was there when it happened, broke down crying at the sight of his daughter actually seeing the world. At 12 weeks, She breathed without the ventilator for the first time. Just 10 minutes, but 10 minutes of her tiny lungs working on their own. At 14 weeks, Zainab held her for the first time without monitors alarming, without nurses hovering nervously. Just held her daughter against her chest and cried with relief and joy and exhaustion. The NICU became their world. The nurses became their family. Other parents fighting similar battles became their community. Shared understanding that outsiders couldn't comprehend, the terror and hope of watching your too small baby fight for every breath. Tun's old life felt like a dream. Or a nightmare. He barely remembered what it was like to worry about quarterly earnings or political alliances. His world had contracted to this, a room of incubators, the beeping of monitors, the slow progress measured in grams and milliliters. And he was happier than he'd been in years. The constant fear and exhaustion precluded actual happiness. But purposeful. Present. Real in a way he'd never been while managing billions and making strategic decisions. This mattered in ways profit margins never had. At 16 weeks, Dr. Okafor gave them news that felt like a miracle. If she continues progressing at this rate, we might be able to send her home in 4 to 6 weeks. Home. The word was magic. Terrifying magic, because it meant responsibility without the safety net of NICU nurses and monitors. But magic nonetheless. What does she need to come home? Zainab asked. Weight above 4 pounds. Ability to maintain body temperature without an incubator. Feeding consistently without the feeding tube. And we need to make sure the retinopathy has stabilized. If all that happens, she can go home on oxygen. You'll need equipment and training, but she can go home. Tund and Zainab looked at each other, allowing themselves to hope for the first time since that terrifying night when Ayamide was born. Their daughter might actually survive this. 78 days after she was born, Ayamide Adelik came home. She weighed 4 pounds, 2 ounces, still tiny, but strong. Thriving, even by the standards of extreme prematurity. She breathed on her own, fed from a bottle, maintained her body temperature. The retinopathy had stabilized after laser treatment. The brain bleed had resolved without causing obvious damage, though they wouldn't know for years whether there were subtle effects. They brought her home to Zainab's apartment in Suralere. Tund had offered to find somewhere bigger, better, but Zainab refused. This is my home. Where I was living when you left. If you want to be part of her life, you come here. I'm not moving into some place you've bought to assuage your guilt. So Tund came there. Every day. Morning feedings at 6. Evening feedings at 9. Middle of the night feedings at 2 a.m. He learned to change diapers, to recognize Ayamide's different cries, to burp her without making her spit up. He learned infant CPR and how to work the oxygen monitor and what to do if she had an apnea episode. He was present. Consistently. Exhaustingly. In ways he'd never imagined billionaires could be present, because in his old life, childcare was something staff handled. But there was no staff now. Just him and Zainab, taking shifts, dividing responsibility, slowly learning to trust each other as partners if not lovers. Meanwhile, his old empire continued its spectacular collapse. Adelik global stock price had dropped 67% since Kunal took over. 2 major divisions had been sold to competitors. Thousands of employees had been laid off. Everything Tund's father and grandfather had built was disintegrating exactly as predicted. And Tund felt nothing. Occasionally he'd see a news headline about another Adelik global disaster and experience a flicker of something. Not quite regret, more like nostalgia for a person he used to be. But it passed quickly. That empire had never really been his. It had been his father's dream, his grandfather's legacy, a prison disguised as inheritance. Losing it had been liberation. His new consulting business was generating modest income, helping small companies scale sustainably, using his expertise for something other than wealth accumulation. The money was a fraction of what he'd had before, maybe 5% of his peak earnings. But it was enough. Enough to contribute to Iamide's care, to help Zainab with bills, to live comfortably if not extravagantly. Comfortable was a revelation. Tund had gone from 37 rooms to a 3-bedroom apartment. From 19 cars to using ride-shares. From private jets to commercial flights. From couture suits to off-the-rack clothing. And he discovered something surprising. He didn't miss it. The luxury had never actually made him happy. It had just insulated him from the discomfort that might have prompted actual growth. 6 months after Iamide came home, Tund and Zainab developed a routine that worked. He'd arrive at her apartment every morning, help with the morning feeding and medications. Iamide still needed breathing treatments twice daily. Then he'd work from her kitchen table while she went to the clinic for half-days. He'd handle the afternoon feeding and nap, then Zainab would take over when she got home. Evenings were shared, both of them there, co-parenting, sometimes eating dinner together, occasionally watching Iamide sleep while discussing their days. It wasn't romantic. The boundary was clear. They weren't together, weren't trying to rebuild a relationship beyond co-parenting. But they were becoming friends. The kind of friendship forged through shared trauma, through 6 months of NICU vigils and middle-of-the-night feedings and terror that sometimes still woke them both up, convinced they'd hear monitors alarming. "Do you regret it?" Zainab asked one evening. Iamide was 6 months old, adjusted age 2.5 months. They measured development from her due date, not birth date. She just smiled for the first time, a real, social smile that made both parents cry with relief and joy. "Regret what?" "Everything you gave up. The billions. The company. The life you had." Tund looked at Iamide, sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, healthy and beautiful and alive against all odds. "I regret how long it took me to make the right choice. I regret the hurt I caused you. I regret that Iamide's first months were trauma instead of joy. But losing the money, the empire." He shook his head. "That wasn't loss. That was course correction. I was building the wrong life, becoming the wrong person. Losing everything forced me to figure out who I actually am when you strip away all the wealth and status." "And who is that?" "I'm still figuring it out. But I know I'm better than I was. More present. More human. More capable of loving something beyond my own success." He smiled at his daughter. "She saved me. In a weird way, being born too early because of my choices, that saved me from becoming the person I was turning into. That's a heavy burden to put on a baby. I'm not putting it on her. She'll never know. But it's true nonetheless." Tund looked at Zainab. "Thank you. For letting me be here. For giving me the chance to prove I could change. You didn't have to do that. I didn't do it for you. I know. You did it for her. But I'm grateful anyway." They stood together, watching their daughter play, two people who'd created life together and then nearly destroyed it, who'd found their way back to partnership if not love, who'd learned the hard way that some choices can't be undone but can be learned from. 5 years after Iamide's traumatic birth, Tunda Delik stood outside her kindergarten classroom, watching through the window as his daughter played with other children. She was small for her age. The prematurity had left its mark, but fierce and joyful and completely whole. She had Zainab's compassion and Tund's determination. She remembered none of her first months, the incubators and tubes and battles for survival. To her, life had always been this: safe, loved, full of people who chose to be present rather than obligated to appear. "She's doing great," Zainab said, joining him at the window. They did this sometimes, co-parenting drop-off and pick-up, attending school events together, presenting a united front even though they'd never rekindled their romance. "She is," Tund agreed. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. For delayed effects from the prematurity. But she just keeps thriving. Because she's strong. Always has been. Fighting battles since before she was born." Zainab smiled. "She gets that from both of us, I think. your stubbornness and my refusal to quit. Deadly combination. They watched Ayamide for a while longer. Then Zainab asked the question she'd been asking variations of for 5 years. Do you ever regret it? Really? I regret that I didn't choose you both from the beginning. That I wasted months being a coward. That Ayamide had to fight so hard because of my choices. Tund paused. But losing the empire? Becoming ordinary? No. That was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to discover what actually matters. The consulting firm he'd built was successful in its own modest way. Not billions, but enough. He helped non-profits and social enterprises scale sustainably, using his business expertise for something meaningful. The work was satisfying in ways wealth accumulation had never been. He lived in a comfortable 3-bedroom apartment in Yaba, drove a 6-year-old car, wore off-the-rack clothes, rode public transport sometimes, lived the kind of normal life he'd once dismissed as failure. And he was happy. Genuinely, sustainably happy in ways he'd never been while controlling billions. Meanwhile, the Adelique global story had become a cautionary tale in business schools. How quickly empires could collapse. How destructive it was to prioritize succession over competence. How family businesses could self-destruct in single generations. Tund's role in that collapse was debated. Some saw him as the hero who walked away from corruption. Others saw him as the fool who threw away billions for sentimentality. Most saw him as a complex person who'd made complex choices with no clear right answers. He didn't care about the narratives. Didn't read the business school case studies or the think pieces about his fall from grace. That person, the billionaire prince of Lagos, felt like someone else's life. What will you tell her? Zainab asked. When she's old enough to understand. When she Googles your name and finds all those articles about what you gave up. The truth. That I made terrible choices that hurt people I loved. That I prioritized empire over family. That I nearly destroyed everything that mattered by choosing wrong. But then I got a second chance, one I didn't deserve, and I chose right. Better late than never, but better would have been choosing right from the beginning. Think she'll understand? Maybe not now. But eventually. He glanced at Zainab. Will you tell her I was a coward? That I abandoned you both. I'll tell her you were human. That you made mistakes and then did the hard work of becoming better. That's all any of us can do, recognize when we're wrong and change course. Zainab smiled. And I'll tell her you've been present every single day of her life since the moment you held her in the NICU. That you chose her over billions. That she was worth more to you than any empire. She was. Is. Always will be. They watched their daughter for a few more minutes, then headed home. Still co-parents. Still partners in the profound work of raising this extraordinary child. Still not together romantically, but something deeper, people who'd survived war together and built peace from the ruins. That evening, as Tund helped Ayamide with her bedtime routine, she asked a question that stopped his heart. Daddy, why don't you live with us? He'd been preparing for this question for years. Because Mommy and I love each other in a different way than married people do. We're friends and partners in taking care of you, but we're not together. But you're here every day. I am. Because being your daddy is the most important thing I do. So I show up every single day to make sure you know you're loved. Did you always do that? The question cut deep. No, baby. When you were first born, I wasn't there like I should have been. I made some mistakes that hurt Mommy and hurt you. But then I learned better. And I've been here every day since. That's what people do when they mess up. They learn and they change and they show up. She seemed to process this with the serious expression she made when thinking hard. I'm glad you show up now. Me too, sweet girl. Me too. After Iamide fell asleep, Tund sat in Zainab's living room, the same living room where she told him she was pregnant 7 years ago. Where he'd walked out. Where he'd made the worst decision of his life. She asked why I don't live here, he told Zainab. I heard. You handled it well. Did I? I feel like I'm constantly explaining my failures to her. You're explaining that people can change. That mistakes don't define you if you do the work to be better. That's an important lesson. Zainab sat beside him. Tund, I need to tell you something. The serious tone made him nervous. What? I've been seeing someone. Another doctor at the clinic. Nothing serious yet, but it's heading that direction. I wanted you to hear it from me before Iamide mentions him. The news hit harder than he'd expected. Some part of him had been holding out hope that someday, somehow, they'd find their way back to each other romantically. But Zainab was right. That ship had sailed. The betrayal was too deep. The trust too broken. That's good, he said, meaning it. You deserve happiness. Someone who chooses you from the beginning instead of learning to choose you after destroying everything. Don't do that. Don't make yourself the villain. You made mistakes and then you did the hard work. You became the man you should have been. That counts for something. But not enough to try again. Zainab looked at him with compassion. I love who you've become. I respect you. I trust you with our daughter. But every time I look at you, part of me remembers you walking away while I was pregnant. Remembers you marrying someone else. Remembers fighting for Iamide's life while you were choosing empire. I've forgiven you. But I can't forget. And I can't build a romance on that foundation. He understood. Had known this was coming, really. But hearing it still hurt. I want you to be happy, he said. Genuinely. If this doctor makes you happy, then I'm glad. Thank you. And Tund? You'll find someone too. Someone who meets you as you are now, without all the history. Someone you can build something new with. Maybe. Someday. But right now, Tund wasn't looking for romance. He was focused on being the father Iamide deserved. On building a life that meant something beyond profit margins. On proving every single day that he'd learned from his mistakes. The story of Tund Adelique spread through Lagos in the years after Iamide's birth. Not in the society pages, those had moved on to other billionaires, other scandals. But in the conversations that mattered. Between parents balancing work and family. Between people facing impossible choices. Between anyone who'd ever wondered if doing the right thing was worth the cost. Because Tund had lost a $4 billion empire. And in losing it, he'd found something worth infinitely more, himself. His daughter. His purpose. His soul. He'd chosen wrong first. Chosen empire over family, wealth over love, fear over courage. But then he'd chosen right. Better late than never, though better would have been choosing right from the beginning. That was the lesson. Not that he'd found redemption or that everything worked out perfectly. But that choice exists. Always. That it's never too late to course correct. That you can lose everything and discover the loss was liberation. What would you choose? When tested, and you will be tested, who will you choose to be? When your empire demands one thing and your child needs another, which matters more? Can you walk away from billions for a tiny baby in an incubator? Would you have the courage to choose right? These aren't abstract questions. Every day, people face versions of this choice. Career or family? Ambition or presence? What looks successful versus what's actually meaningful? Empire or soul? Comment below. What would you sacrifice for your child? What's your empire that you'd need to walk away from to choose what matters? Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Because Tund Adelique lost everything the world told him to value. Lost it completely. And in losing it, Found something the world can't measure. Contentment. Purpose. Love. The knowledge that he'd finally chosen right. The question isn't whether you'll be tested. You will. The question is, when that test comes, who will you choose to be? Choose wisely. Your daughter might be watching.